Hi everyone, I'm Becca Christensen and I'm founder and CEO of Aura Systems. I also sit on APSE's board of directors, and it's really awesome to join APSE and USC Sol Price and serve as the co-chair of Navigating Leadership in a Changed World for 2012 and now its continuum in 2013. It's really wonderful to welcome everyone back to our two-night inaugural kickoff of our 2013 Navigating Leadership series, Conversations in Leadership. Let's give a round of applause to Howard Schwartz, CaliChar's Chief Deputy Director, for his outstanding presentation last night. We all learned so much. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Robert Barton. Bob is the Inspector General from the Office of the Inspector General. Rather than introduce Bob with his biography, which we have provided to everyone, it's important to introduce him tonight with his backstory, since that's what you're going to be hearing. Robert's agency was awarded the Sol Agency Leadership and Innovation Award at APSE's first annual inaugural Navigating Leadership Awards banquet. Although not part of the review committee, Paul Danchek and I had the great pleasure of interviewing Robert. It was there that we first heard Bob's backstory, and the hair just kind of raised on the back of my neck in understanding the sheer power of a backstory in formulating who we are as people and who we are as leaders in the world. I want you to listen tonight as it reflects back on your own life. You will hear the context of how the occurrences of Bob's life formulated the man and the leader that you see stand before you, and the imprints that these occurrences made in his life and the direction of his career. Secondly, his backstory will also serve as the foundation of collaboration and integration that is the culture that Bob creates in the environment of leadership at the OIG. As we neared the awards banquet, there was an increasing number of registrations of attendees from his staff. The night of the awards banquet, Bob called forward his family, his work family, to stand in the acceptance of his award around him. This is really such a strong example of the type of team environment that can come together in government to drive and support our constituent communities we serve in a virtual society. My last comment about Bob before the evening's presentation is Halloween happens every year. There is a fabled story of leadership that sits at the center of our childhoods, and for that matter, that of our grandchildren. For Halloween, Bob and his staff acted out the characters of this enduring leadership fable. Without saying any more and giving away the punchline, when we reach questions and answers, jot down, ask Bob about Halloween. Without further ado, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you tonight's speaker, Robert Barton, Inspector General, Office of the Inspector General.
Thank you very much. Working on the hugs. Well, I don't know that my life story is as melodramatic as that. At least when I was living it, it seemed, normal to me. I suppose that's true of all of us as we live our lives. But over time, as I shared it in different contexts with different groups and had different reactions to it, it has sort of, I suppose, defined in some ways some of the decisions and things that I've done in my life. I really do think that we are the product of the people that we meet, the people that impact our lives, the things that we learn and the experiences that we have. And so, whether they be good or bad, I think that what we take away from them and how we deal with those things is what ultimately makes us who we are today. So, when I was asked initially, to tell about my background, I started, of course, immediately with my grades in school, and then they said, no, as a child, what was your childhood like? And I am not by nature necessarily a touchy-feely kind of person. In fact, I was sharing with Rebecca that my Myers-Briggs, if any of you have taken these kinds of things, I'm an ESTP, which is not necessarily on the feeling side of things. And my staff will tell you that I'm very results-oriented, very direct, very much about the outcomes. When I read these, I kind of like the person in AA, hi, my name's Bob, I don't care about people's feelings. But I'm working on it. So I'm aware of it, that's the first step for anybody, is awareness, I think, of what your faults are. And so one of the nice things about having Jan as my assistant is when I send an email, if she sees it first, she'll say, put please. And she reminds me, because I'm just thinking, get the job done. This is your job. Just do what I'm asking you to do. But she reminds me of all of those niceties during the day, and I try to do better at that. But and I don't know that it has anything to do with my backstory, because I think what my backstory has given me, if nothing else, is a sense of compassion for people. It's just in overcoming a lot of things, I have sort of turned myself into this driven personality. You know, we hear about type A, and I'm probably type AAA. And so, you know, that's common with a lot of people. Not that I think that that is, by the way, necessary for someone to become a leader. So I'll start off, I would like to show you a baby picture, but unlike Michael Orr, I didn't want to take one on JCPenney. And because my childhood was what I'm about to share with you, I don't have a lot of baby pictures. My mom was 16 when she had my older sister in Chicago, and married my dad at 16. Had my other sister and myself by the time she was 20, at which time, after my birth father left. So my mother was a single mom with 3 kids under the age of 4, and she was 20 years old. And so it was very difficult, as you can imagine, back in the early 60s. And, but, you know, one of the things is, again, the people that impact our lives. And, you know, we all get asked the question, who's your hero? And a lot of people say my mom or my dad. And my mom really was. She really did have a very difficult life, and yet all of her children today are doing well, as well are their families. So, and I think that's the legacy that she left from her life. So she had 3 kids, and was working nights as a nurse's aide, and you couldn't get away with this today. In fact, I would prosecute her for this today. We would get locked in the apartment with the person across the hall kind of watching out for us while she went off to work, and then she'd come back in the morning and unlock it, and, you know, we'd get ready for school or whatever. But, you know, there was a time period there that I don't have a whole lot of memories, from about 0 to 5. Don't have a whole lot of pictures. I don't think, back in those days, everybody didn't have a phone that took pictures, so I don't think we had money to go have sit-down pictures. In fact, I tease my sisters sometimes because they were both 1.5 and 3 years older than me at the time, and remembered a little bit more about our early childhood. But we lived in Chicago. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, maybe some of you, but you know, the apartment buildings are multi-stories high. And the apartment building we were in, we were actually the minorities. And it was largely Puerto Rican families, immigrants, very subsidized housing. And so I was kind of the minority growing up, and didn't know the difference, because when you're 3, 4, 5 playing with people in the hall in the dirt, you know, you don't really pay attention to anything like that. But when I was 5, my mom remarried. So my first stepdad was a factory worker, blue-collar worker in a factory in Chicago. We moved. I have vague recollections because I went to 3 kindergartens. So I was in a kindergarten, she got married, we moved. I went to another kindergarten. She was married for roughly 7 months when my first stepfather was on his way back from work. And in those days, you would cash your check at the job, at the factory. They would actually cash out your paycheck. And it was not, the south side of Chicago in those days even was not a good place to be. And so we were still, lower socioeconomic class there, and you walk everywhere, or you take the L, or you you don't really drive anywhere. And so on his way home, he went under an overpass and was mugged by 3 knife-wielding young men who stabbed him multiple times and stole his paycheck. And so I have, of course, no memory of this. I learned it all growing up later. What I do remember is being in the hospital a lot, because not only was he in the hospital for an extended time before he passed away, my mom was pregnant with my little brother. So she was in the hospital as well. So we were sort of shuttled around between aunts and uncles and things during that time, and then ended up in a 3rd kindergarten. So I went to 3 different kindergartens that year, and that's kind of what I remember of that year. I don't even remember that stepfather. So now my mom has 4 children and is single again. And so from the time I was 5 until the time I was 10, things were pretty touch and go for us, and a lot of moving, a lot of splitting up of the family, different kids being with different family members, that sort of thing. Fortunately, even at that time, both on my mom's side and on my dad's side, there were relatives who were very good people that helped her out. But she persevered, and I like to think some of the resiliency that I've had was ingrained in me from some of the stuff that she went through. But then when I was 10, she remarried again, or shortly before my 10th birthday. My second stepdad was a truck driver, long-distance truck driver. And so, as you can imagine, this plays out as like one of those made-for-TV movies, because of course I hated him. Hated him just because he was another person in the family, then I thought I was the man of the house at 10. And so we had a very difficult relationship from the time I was 10 until the time I was about 16, and I'll take you through that. But then later, as I grew into adulthood and came to have quite a bit of understanding and gratitude for what he had done, taking in a woman and her 4 kids, that we had a very good relationship before he passed. So that was a good turnaround. And let's see if I get the right button here. So before I was the Inspector General, this is me at 10.
Wow.
So this was sort of stability for the first time for me. We actually moved out of Chicago into the suburbs, a place called Fox Lake. And in fact, that uniform is from the Lakeland Cardinals. Why I remember that, I have no idea. That was the baseball team. It was the first time that I'd ever been involved in an organized team experience, because you have to pay for those things. And from 0 to 10, we didn't have money to pay for anything. So, I was never involved in anything organized like that, or even school, because at school someone has to take you, pick you up, that sort of thing. So it was really my first time that I was in that type of experience, and what I remember about that is that I loved it. I loved working with a team, I loved being part of the team, I liked the idea of having, in baseball you have positions. I wasn't very good, but nevertheless it was a fun experience. And all of these things, I think, build into us at an early age, and we don't realize what we're taking from it at the time. But for me, it taught me some lessons, and it gave me that stability. And up until that time also, I had, let's say, not done very well in school, as you can imagine. In fact, my sister had to teach me how to write in cursive, because in 3rd grade, which was during that time frame, I went to 2 different 3rd grades, and I missed, one had already taught the kids how to write in cursive, and the other one hadn't started, so it was the other way around. So when I got to the second school, I didn't learn either. So everybody else was writing in cursive, and what I would do is I would print and connect the printed letters together. My staff laughs because even to this day, I write in block print. I very seldom write anything in cursive. In fact, my wife, when we were first dating, and I actually wrote a letter by hand in cursive, knew that was special, because I don't often do that. And Janet would tell you that when I do attempt it, it's like reading another foreign language. But so much to say that all of a sudden now, I actually stayed in the same school from 5th to 8th grade. And all of a sudden realized that, hey, I'm pretty good at school. I was able to do pretty well in school when I stayed in the same school and had the same stability to do that. One of the things that during that time frame, I think, that sort of stuck with me through today is the idea that your circumstances that you're in at any one time can always change, for the better or for the worse. In my case, I got to do things that I never dreamed of doing before we moved to the suburbs. I thought that it was normal every day to get in a fight to and from school, every single day. I thought that was normal. And then I learned that wasn't normal. I learned it the hard way, but you know, you learn. So then again, things changed. So my stepdad, the truck driver, who was, by the way, 6'4", 240 pounds, big guy, strong guy, was carrying a refrigerator up a ramp. And if you know anything about long-distance truck drivers, they typically hire their help the day of. So you come into town, you hire laborers, and in Chicago it's icy. And when you put the ramps on the back of the truck, there are slots that they go into. And they were iced over. And so he had this laborer, he gave him a screwdriver and said, hey, chisel that stuff out and set the ramp. Well, the guy didn't do a very good job. So my stepdad, as he's carrying a refrigerator, why he was carrying on his back, I don't know. You have dollies for that, but he was, maybe because he could. And so he was carrying this thing with a mover strap, and the ramp dropped 3 feet and crushed the discs in his lower back. So he was permanently disabled. And it's strange what we take away facts and figures from our childhood, but I remember that we thought we were millionaires because he got $137,000 as his permanent disability payout for the rest of his life. I mean, other than, you know, disability, which at the time we thought was a fortune. But because he was disabled and could no longer work in the trucking industry, we were fortunate in that he had moved a family out to the Fresno area a few years before and had become friends with them. Friends with the family. They owned a vineyard outside of Fresno, a little town called Friant, and they needed someone there to just run the place, just live on the property and kind of be a ranch overseer. So he moved us, lock, stock, and barrel, at 13 years old to California. So I'm starting high school. I'm already not real happy with this guy, right? Now he's taken me from all my friends that I'm about to go to high school with, from my stable 4 years existence, from 5th to 8th grade, and uprooting all that. So I had a little bit of resentment over that. But I knew how to be the new kid at school. I'd done it enough times. So we moved to California, and within 2 years, we realized that Fresno isn't anywhere near the beach. And the air is really, really bad for someone with emphysema, which is what my stepdad had. Unfortunately, he and my mom smoked their entire lives. And so he, after 2 years, was having serious respiratory problems, and so they were contemplating another move to Colorado. And so I now was 16 and threw a fit, which I'm not very proud of. But at the time, I had become very entrenched in the high school. I was between my sophomore and junior year in high school, and I had been doing well. I was getting straight A's in school. I was playing 4 or 5 sports, and all that was going well. I had a wrestling coach. So this would be sort of, aside from my mother and my stepfather Hugh, this would be my next person, I think, who had a big impact on my life. And Coach Downing, who was a wrestling coach of mine, really, more than anything else, I think, instilled within me the idea of self-discipline. You know, if any of you know the sport of wrestling, you have to be very self-disciplined anyway, but even more so than any of the other sports I played. And I lettered in track, I lettered in cross-country, football, and wrestling. You know, that one was the one where I think character came out in terms of self-sacrifice, not only eating, but running, and all the other things we had to do. And so, but as a coach, he was also a mentor and talked to his athletes not only about sports, but also about life and, you know, how we should conduct ourselves. And we would go on the road for tournaments, and we would talk ahead of time how we were going to behave when we were in a restaurant, how we were going to talk to the people serving us. You know, so a lot of his values sort of rubbed off, if you will. And in addition to which, my mom, who had not graduated from high school, obviously, during this time had always pushed education on both myself and my 2 older sisters. And so by this time I was at school in California, they were in California getting residency so they could go to college. My oldest sister was still working because she and I ended up starting college the same year. My second oldest sister went to beauty school thinking she would work for a year and then go to college, but ended up falling in love, marrying her husband, and that was that in terms of she's now a wonderful mother of 3 and grandmother of 6 and very happy, but sort of derailed the higher education aspect for her, which is a shame because she was a valedictorian of her class. Of the 3 of us, I think she was the smartest. Book smart, school smart. But at 16, so I'm faced with this dilemma of having to move again. And my wrestling coach said, well, he and his wife were in their 30s, both teachers, had no children yet. They offered to allow me to live with them to finish out high school. And so I went to court, and you can be emancipated in the state of California at 16, so long as you can show that you can support yourself and you have a place to live. And so, you know, we worked that out, and then from that time on, I lived with them my junior and senior year of high school. Also worked, you know, other than odd jobs, I worked as a busboy. I think my first paying job, when I said, who is this guy FICA taking money out of my check? But you know, the first check I got, I learned a lot of things on that job, like, you know, you're nice to the waitresses because they're the ones that give you tips, you know. And so you learn some life skills in some of those early jobs. And after that, I'd gone through ROP in high school, and so learned how to do some framing and got jobs with contractors, did some lifeguarding one summer, and you know, various things like that too. But I worked basically my last 2 years of high school and lived with my wrestling coach, which, as it turns out, ended up paying off because my mom and dad and younger brother had moved to Colorado, and I don't know, not because she wouldn't have wanted to. I think she did always tell us we should go on in our schooling. And in fact, one of the neat stories about my mom is she came back the year I graduated from high school, and she had been working on her high school degree in adult education. She came back to where I was living and graduated the same month I did from high school. So that was kind of neat to graduate with my mom. I mean, not in the same ceremony, but at the same time. So she was important enough to her to finish something like that she'd started and to set that example for us. So, and my mom is exactly 20 years older than me. So when I was 18, she was 38 and graduated from high school. So it all worked out well because as I was wrestling in high school, another sort of experience, I suppose, that shaped who I am today in terms of overcoming things or setting goals or realizing that it doesn't always work out the way you want it to. I was a fairly successful wrestler. My junior year had coaches talking to me from colleges. My senior year I went through the whole season and I got to the end of the year tournaments. Admit again, I have an ego, and unfortunately then it was much worse. And so I thought, I'm ranked number 1, I go on the mat, they're supposed to just fall down. Well, the first guy I wrestled put me on my back in the first round, and I lost that match and had to wrestle all the way back through the loser's bracket, which means you do twice as much to get back to the finals, which you actually can't get to the finals, so the best you can get is the 3rd place match, which I wrestled all the way back to and ended up losing by 1 point. So now I went from being ranked number 1 to getting 4th and being an alternate for the state tournament as opposed to going there being favored to win it. So huge letdown for me. And I remember to this day my coach, who could have very well done what I'd seen other coaches do, which is kick their person's thing and say, you blew it and all this, you know, say to me, what did you learn from this? Well, I learned I'm not happy, you know, I learned it's not fun to lose, but it later on caused me to reflect, you know, taking things for granted, resting on our laurels, you know, not putting out the effort just because you've done it before. And so, fortunately, there was a local coach at Fresno State who had seen me wrestle locally and had already talked to me and still offered me a scholarship. Because again, I would have had no money for school. I had good grades. I was like number 3rd in my class in high school. But so I got some academic scholarships for the first year, and then I had a wrestling scholarship. But back then it was year to year. So you had, each year you basically had to prove yourself to get the scholarship for the next year. And so I went to Fresno State, And yes, that's a college picture. And I have people that look at that and say, you look like you're 13 there. But so I went to Fresno State, and for the first 2 years was on the wrestling team and did okay. And then my sophomore year, we went on a trip to Utah. And I'm not going to demean Utah because my wife is from Utah and her family and wonderful people, but at the time after this, I hated Utah because the first night we wrestled in Logan, Utah, where Utah State exists, and the fellow I was wrestling put a move called an arm bar, which means he took my wrist, levered my elbow, and wrenched back. So it ripped all the ligaments in my arm. And we're talking now the early 80s, and back then, they're not allowed to do this now, but they had cortisone shots that the trainers carried. So he just shot cortisone into my elbow. So the next night, we wrestled Weber State, which was in Ogden, Utah, and I wasn't feeling anything in my elbow. We taped it up. Well, if you tape up an arm for a wrestler, it's like putting a bullseye on there. So, of course, the second night, that guy just hammered my elbow. So I finished that match, couldn't even raise my arm to my mouth. And the third night, I was supposed to wrestle the Pac-10 champion out of Brigham Young down in Orem, Utah. Well, we didn't have any substitutes on the traveling team, so the coach said, look, I don't expect you to win, but I know you're wrestling one arm, just don't get pinned. We want to save some points. But he still had me go out there. College coaches a little different than high school coaches. It's a business, and they have someone behind you that can fill that slot. And so I went out there, got tore up again, got back to Fresno, literally could not move my arm, went to the doctors, they said, you're done for the year, you've totally torn all the ligaments in your left elbow. So that ended my wrestling career, and in fact, more ways than one, because we got a new coach that year, that summer, came in, and he called me in and said, you know, it's time to reevaluate your scholarship. You didn't do so well last year. I said, well, yeah, I was injured. And he said, and I know you've rehabbed it and all that, and you're welcome to walk on the team, but I've got to give your scholarship to someone else because I'm doing some recruiting. And I said, well, that's very nice, but I have to eat, so I have to get a job and finish school. So I had gone to school, much of which was influenced by my wrestling coach, thinking that I was going to be a history teacher and a high school coach. That all changed after my sophomore year because I had friends in college who said, hey, there's this good deal. If you switch majors to criminology, they'll put you through the academy, you get credits for it, and the sheriff's department will hire you extra help to work in the jails. You can make money to pay for school. I thought, sounds great. So that's what I did. My sister by that time, that's what it says, my oldest sister by that time had joined Fresno State, and we were going to school together, and she was studying to be a teacher and has been a teacher her whole career. But so I switched majors to criminology and went through the Sheriff's Department Academy, and then, let's see, I think this is the next slide. There we go. And so I guarded inmates in jails and hospitals. That's a goofy picture, I know, but that was my mom. She had to have a picture of me in uniform, so she made me come over on duty one time and take a picture. But whatever. And that's all of her family in the background. She had her very proud wall there. So, but as you can see, my hair was slightly long. You know, I think I was minimum standards at the collar right there. And so when I came out of college, when I graduated, I'd already been working for the Sheriff's Department, extra help in the jails and so on. They said, you know what? We want you to go undercover in a high school. So I was 21 Jump Street before there was 21 Jump Street. So in 1985, 5 years after I graduated high school, I went back to high school. And I went in August, that's me right there, trying to avoid the camera, because when you're an undercover officer, you don't really want your picture in their yearbook. You try not to have your picture taken in the yearbook. You don't want them to have a picture to shoot at later or whatever. So this is a day where they hauled all the students out of class for the senior picture, and they made you sit in the stands and take the picture. And as you can see, drugs were rampant in the mid-'80s there. PCP was a big problem. Both meth and rock cocaine were just starting to get started. Just starting to have labs in the Central Valley. So there was a huge drug epidemic. And so, first of all, I would not recommend the movie 21 Jump Street to any of you. It's trashy.
Funny.
Yeah, it's funny, but But I will say, some of the things, they obviously must have talked to someone in undercover work, because the line that, I think it's Ice Cube. Is it Ice Cube? Who's the guy that plays the lieutenant in it? Okay. He actually used a line that my lieutenant used on us, which is, I don't care about the dealers at school. I want you to get the dealer suppliers off campus. So that's what we tried to do, was I would buy from someone on campus, I would tell them, hey, I'm working for these guys in construction after work, and I've got to supply them, and I can't give you the money because it's their money, and can you take me to the supplier, and whatever. And so we'd get them to do that. So from end of August to December, I was in the high school. Then I got myself kicked out into the continuation school from January to March. And then in March, we rounded up 36 students in the two schools for dealing. I'm not talking about smoking a joint. I mean, I would have arrested half the school. It was for people who were selling it for profit and had connections to these dealers. We busted 10 off-site suppliers with search warrants all in one day. We had about 75 officers involved from multi-agencies, big task force. They had me in a van. They walked the kids past, and I'd ID them as they were going back past, and it was funny because I could hear them talk to, and they'd be going, hey, where's Brian? He's the biggest doper in school. Because when you're undercover, they also have you...
Did you do better on the wrestling team?
I didn't get to go on the wrestling team, although I will tell you, they tried to recruit me. So in PE, all the coaches wanted to recruit me for football and wrestling and everything else. And I was playing, a stoner, so I'd be like, oh man, that's not for me. And I'd sleep in class. But I had to go to every class. The teachers didn't know who I was. In fact, we had one teacher we suspected, but it turned out he wasn't dealing with kids, he was just using himself. And we were able to deal with that. But it was interesting because, God bless him, there was a teacher, and I couldn't help myself. So understand, I'm a 4.0 college graduate, right, from Fresno State.
Right.
And I'm in these classes, and I'm told, you can't do too well, but you have to pass. Because, we don't want you flunking out. That would kind of defeat the purpose of being in the school undercover. And so, Jana likes this story. So, the kids would cheat, and because we were all dopers, we were all cheating off each other, I knew they were cheating. So I'd be in English with the vocabulary test, and I'd purposely figure out, okay, 10 words, if they get 4 of them wrong, it's a 60, it's not passing. So I'd write my test, they'd all be cheating off me, I'd make sure I had 4 wrong answers, and then right before I turned it in, I'd erase one and change it to the right answer. So I'd get a 70 and pass, and they were probably all like, at the end of this thing, that cop was stupid. Couldn't pass the vocabulary. But, so things like that happen. But the two things I took away from this that I would say sort of helped frame my thought process for leading is one, what I call sort of the 80% rule. And different people probably express this different ways. When you talk about making choices, and I've talked to a lot of youth groups. Given my background, it's interesting. I usually start off and I tell them some of those facts about being 5, being beat up, having a father that died, having another father injured, having to eat, macaroni and cheese 3 days in a row, things like that. And the kids, because I'm, a guy in a suit and tie, they never think it's me. And I say, well, who do you think that guy was? And they say, oh, so-and-so, so-and-so. I said, no, it was me. And I use that as a motivational speech for them to explain to them, you can achieve things if you set your mind to it. Well, one of the things I saw here that disheartened me, I'll put it that way, is that the good kids, the kids who weren't dealing, the kids that weren't smoking, they knew who all the other kids were that were doing it. They knew exactly who they were. They knew who I was. They would just avoid it. They wouldn't go into that bathroom because they know dope's being sold. I didn't have to go looking for my first deal. In fact, the first month I wasn't supposed to buy dope. I got in trouble for my first buy because it was too soon. The standard operating procedure undercover in a situation like this is you don't want to look too eager. So you don't go, hey, who's the dope dealer in school? Hey, you got any dope to sell me? You just play it low-key and let them approach you. Well, I went in the bathroom for legitimate reasons, and this guy walks up to me at the baggie and says, hey, you want to buy, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, I'm not going to turn it down. Okay. And then I went back to the boss, at the end of the day, went back to the department and booked it into evidence and filled out a report, and he's like, what are you doing? You're going to blow your cover. I said, what was I supposed to do? say, no, I don't like dope, thank you very much. So it was scary that the good kids knew all this was going on and did nothing.
Was your cover ever blown during this?
I had a couple close calls. I was followed a few times. But what basically ended up happening is this rule that I'm talking about, this 80% rule, is you probably have 10% that for whatever reason, and I don't want to say any child is doomed. I don't believe that. I mean, you could have said that about me. But that for whatever reason, the odds are they're going to make bad choices, and it's just unfortunate. Sometimes they don't have an environment around them to pull them out of it or whatever. You have 10% who are the other side that are either so sheltered or have such a strong structure that they're going to be okay. But you have this huge group in the middle, this 80% in the middle. It just depends on how strong the temptation is and when it comes. And one of the questions, and I'm just going to jump, I hope that's okay, Becca, but one of the questions that I had suggested for you all was, what does it take to be a leader? And I will tell you that not only my growing up experiences, this experience undercover, but other life experiences, what I tell my daughters, I have 2 daughters, you have a lot of choices to make, but when it comes down to it, it's whether or not you're a thermostat or a thermometer. So what does the thermostat do? It regulates the temperature. What does the thermometer do? It reflects the temperature. So your choice isn't whether you're going to make a choice. You make a choice. By doing nothing, you're making a choice. And we could quote Bonhoeffer, and we could quote Burke and all of those folks about all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. But the reality is doing nothing is a choice. So your real choice is, am I going to be someone that goes along and reflects the temperature in the room, or am I going to be somebody that changes? Am I going to be that agent for change? And so, for example, my older daughter would tell me of situations where her friends would suggest something, and she'd say, Dad, you're right. All it took for me was to say once, guys, this is a stupid idea. We're either going to get in trouble, somebody's going to get hurt. And I would talk one person into my side, and the next thing you know, we've nixed the idea. And she said, because when I was, I don't know how many of you have taken the same course, probably most of you or some of you, in psychology where they talk about peer pressure and the studies they've done where they've taken the visual aid and said to the whole class, okay, this one's the highest, everybody agrees, right? Yeah. Okay, so this one's second, this one's third. We're going to have some test subjects come in, and when I ask which one's highest, you all raise your hand for the second one that you know isn't. And we're going to see how they react to that peer pressure. Well, the studies show that like 80% of the time they go along with the crowd, even though everybody knows it's wrong. And then as soon as you change the dynamics and 1 or 2 people go, no, that's wrong, it's really this right answer, now they feel okay to jump on board because there's somebody else. Every now and then you get someone who has the strength of character to be the only one raising their hand. But that experience for me was something that I tried to instill in my children, and I think in my employees too, is look, and I'm not talking about right and wrong decisions, I hope everybody makes right decisions, but just making those decisions. Be the person that says, hey, I'm going to change things, I'm going to look for opportunities to change. So while I was undercover and while I was in the Sheriff's Department, I took the law school admissions test, got accepted to UC Davis Law School, and in 1985 went to UC Davis. So that's me. I had to grow the mustache there just to pretend, just to show that I was over 21 after that. It wasn't a very good mustache. I still can't grow them. But, at any rate, so that's a law school carrel is what they call them, a little closet they stick you in to study and ensure that you do your work, I guess. But so I went to Davis Law School. During that time, I thought, well, I'm going to be out of a job because I'm leaving the Sheriff's Department, so a nice way to pay for it is to join the Marines. So I joined the Marines in law school to pay for it, and they paid for the first year I was inactive, and then I went to Officer Candidate School that summer, and that's me. Well, let's see. Here we go. So that's me right there. I have a thing with all of my employees. I bring them in and I tell them, look, free lunch if you can pick me out of this group.
That's why I didn't mark you. I was hoping you would do that here.
I give them a hint. I said, you can rule out everyone African American.
Yeah.
And so that in my platoon, that rules out about 6 and the 2 sergeants. So, but at any rate, it's very difficult to do because, as you can see, we all look alike. And so, you know, the Marines, sometimes when I'm asked about that experience, because what ended up happening was the last week of Officer Candidate School, I went over a wall in an obstacle course. And again, you can understand because of my personality type, I wasn't even slightly competitive with the other platoon we were racing. But the event here was that the obstacle course, you were competing against another platoon, and you're supposed to hang, as our officer here could tell you, you're supposed to hang off one side and drop to the bottom. But I vaulted over this thing, and so from 20 feet or whatever the distance was, hit the ground in kind of dirt and sawdust, and my left knee just went pop. So my meniscus ruptured, my AC, everything got shredded, cartilage, all that good stuff. So it was the size of a watermelon. Last week of training. Well, the difference between the Marines and some other service branches, not to dismiss any other service branches, is that they require you to finish your last 2 physical tests to get through OCS. Well, there was no way I could do it. I was on crutches. So they said, well, you have 2 options. One is you come back next year and finish if you can walk. And I said, oh, no sweat. I'll come back and hobble through 1 week. Oh, no, not the last week. You get to start at day 1 again.
Wow.
So, I did not relish that idea, and I said, well, what's the other option? Well, we'll keep you on the books for a year. We'll give you rehab. At the end of that, if your leg's not better, you can make a decision on surgery or not, but then we're going to settle with you, and you're going to get a limited medical discharge. So that's what ended up happening. So I went back to Davis, went back to law school, finished law school. But the reason I say that is, it's one of those experiences where it's one of the few things in my life that I haven't finished, that I have regret about. I mean, I look back on that and I think, gosh, maybe I should have stuck it out with that year, tried to go back through the 10 weeks, etc. Who knows how life would have changed. But on the other hand, I wouldn't trade that experience that I had for anything. Because, as you can imagine, one of probably the best crucibles for leadership is an officer's candidate program, whether in any service. There's a lot of things that they instill in you during that time in terms of teamwork and loyalty and hard work and perseverance and all of those phrases that I'm sure you've heard, with something that you and I, unless we're in police work, don't have on the line, and that is somebody's life next to you. Very few of us can say that unless we're in law enforcement or the military, that decisions we make, people we order to do things, could potentially, not come back. And so it's quite the crucible, as I said, as far as molding leaders and training people to have that responsibility. So certainly another experience that I would not trade, that molded who I am today in my backstory. And then one of the things that I think it did, now you've heard about not only circumstances as a youth, but injury to the elbow, injury to the knee, is that this too will pass. And I have to remind people of that when they come in, and I have to talk them off the ledge because things aren't going right, and the project's not going to be done on time, and we're not going to do this, and it's going to be okay. Deep breaths, it'll be okay. Sometimes we forget that the sky isn't necessarily falling. Did I go backwards again? No, this is the next one. So after law school, I get hired as a deputy district attorney in Kern County. I was sharing with somebody else that for me, it wasn't like, gee, I want to be president of the United States, let me work backwards and see what I need to do. And I'm stealing this now from somebody else. But what I always did was I stretched myself in the opportunities I had and then looked for the next opportunity to come along. So as a brand new deputy DA, I tried as many cases as I could. I tried over 23 trials my first year in the DA's office. Now, they were all misdemeanor trials. You could do them in 2 days, but I just wanted to have that experience of getting better, knowing my job. The second year, they moved me into narcotics, which I had some experience in already. I tried 28 trials, which was the most that anybody in the office tried that year. My third year, I was given a murder trial, which is slightly unusual for deputy DAs to get a murder trial in your third year, but the person that assigned it to me was starting a new gang unit, and they said, it's a loser, we don't think you can win, but this guy's really bad, he did it, we know he did it, we need to hold his feet to the fire and pray for a miracle, and besides, if it's on your record that you lost, who cares? Okay. He was convicted and is still doing time for first-degree murder, and it was a rather tragic case. But after that, I went on to help start the first gang unit in the office, tried over, I don't know, probably 20 murder trials, handled more than that, 3 capital cases, which again isn't because it's a resume building thing or anything like that, but it's within that particular career path, always looking for that next challenge to stretch myself. And it's funny too, because during that whole time, from the time I made the decision to switch into law, to criminology, I had a conscious belief that I was fortunate in that my career path for me was something I felt called to do. And I tell people when they're making decisions about job changes, etc., that I sort of look at 4 things for me when I've made job decisions. One, first of all, is the very practical. Do I have money to pay my family? What's the time going to be like? What's the distance going to be like? And sometimes we give up the big paying job because it's too many hours, it's not worth it to our family, or the job that commutes too far, or whatever. Those are very practical concerns. As you advance in your career, those give weight, in my mind, to the 3 others. The second of which is still practical, but it really has to do more with my own well-being, and that is, do I like the people I work with, and do I like the job that I'm doing? Do I like going to work every day? Those are things that might keep me from going to another job, even though it may pay more or have more prestige or whatever. And then for me, the third is, do I feel like it's where I'm supposed to be in the sense that my talents are being used here? It's worthwhile. I'm feeling challenged. I don't feel wasted. That sort of thing. And I know we're getting into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then, it sounds a lot like that, but the 4th one really is that kind of concept of self-actualization, which really is, you can use all the slogans, be all you want to be, I guess, if you go back to Marines or whatever, but it really is, what is it that I'm doing that's doing something good for the world? I remember Florian Bartosik, he was the dean of the law school when I was there, who told the incoming class, lawyers get a bad rap and they deserve it most of the time. I used to tease people and say, I'm a prosecutor, and hope they didn't know that was a lawyer. And even now in the OIG, sometimes I say, oh, I'm the Inspector General, I don't share that I'm a lawyer, which is too bad, but because lawyers do a lot of good for the world. I mean, they're agents of change. They are people that advocate for change, and I remember even being in law school and having friends at Davis, which is fairly well known for being a law school that puts out a lot of public interest lawyers, who said, well, gee, if you're going into criminal law, you should be a defense attorney. Well, having been in law enforcement, I saw how the system works. Public defenders, God bless them, and a lot of my friends were defense attorneys who did noble work, are reactionary. The DA is the one with all the power in the system. I actually decided on a daily basis when I was filing cases what charges would be filed. I argued what sentence would be appropriate to the judge. So, there's a quote that's still in the Bakersfield, California, and I remember they were asking me about, I don't remember all the cases I won, but I lost 2 felony trials, and I could tell you everything about those 2 cases. And one of them was a child sexual assault case, and I remember the questions from the reporters, about those cases, and it always kills me when they say, well, are you happy with the verdict? Well, I'm never happy about anybody being found guilty of a horrific crime. Do I think justice was done? Perhaps that's a question, but what I always found, and in those situations, is I told them, I said, I pray every day that I make the right decision, because I'm making, in that job, life and death decisions. And so, at the end of the day, when I would have this discussion with students, first of all, I would tell them, I want to be in the position of being able to make right choices. And then when I was in the job, one of the biggest compliments I think I ever got was from a person on the other side of the bar, a defense attorney, who I had a case with, and I actually dismissed on his client. It's an interesting story. There, 3 gang members go do a drive-by shooting. The truck's identified, it's placed in a parking lot, the cops surround it, they go in, they arrest 2 of the guys, they find together, they find a 3rd guy in a laundry room. They were all identified at the scene as being Hispanic males, shaved heads, white t-shirts. In Bakersfield, in that part of town, that's a large part of the population. And so the 3rd guy pulled out a laundry room. He fit all the, all the criteria. Tattoos, he was on probation, he refused to talk when the cops talked to him, which, given his past experience, I would have too. They drove some witnesses by and they said, yeah, those look like the guys. They got hooked up and arrested. Well, it turns out, when I started looking deeper into it, the 2 guys that were, we'll call it Gang X, definitely in it together, definitely rivals of the people they shot at. This 3rd guy, other than being Hispanic male in the right age category, was Gang Y, who I knew probably wouldn't have been in the same car with these first 2 guys. But he hadn't talked to the cops, and his attorney was saying, hey, he wasn't there, it's not him, it's a bad ID. And this is the compliment part. He said, I'm going to give you the name of his grandmother and his girlfriend. That was the other thing. He didn't live at that apartment complex. But his grandmother did. If you go talk to her, and I trust you, Bob, I think you're a stand-up guy, she's going to tell you he was there that night actually going to do real laundry. And his girlfriend was there when the cops rolled in. He didn't know what they were arresting him for, but he wasn't talking because he had no idea what was going on. Well, I did that. Came back, dismissed on his client, knew it wasn't the right person, or wasn't involved in the case. Well, the reason I share that story is because, again, anyone that's in that job realizes that there's a lot of public pressure on those cases, to get the bad guys. And we missed one of the bad guys. To this day, we don't know who the 3rd guy was. But it wasn't this guy. And so the fact that someone on the defense side would realize that I would have the integrity to dismiss if I was convinced this guy was innocent is a story that I also share with law students because I've taught at Cal State and junior college, and I've taught law students that defense and prosecution is not diametrically opposed. Defense, yes, they have a job to defend their client and, if possible, get them acquitted, but sometimes they know they're guilty. The prosecution, on the other hand, should not be going into every case saying, I'm going to convict at all costs. It should be to see justice done. And if somewhere along the line that means you dismiss the case or you don't have the right person, that's the right thing for the prosecutor to do. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. But that was my experience, and then along came 2005. I messed up. Maybe I didn't. 2005, I was selected because by 2000 I had become a supervisor over 17 of the deputy DAs in the office in gangs, prisons, juvenile, truancy, was supervising those cases and interacting with some people in Sacramento involved in prisons. And when they were looking for someone to run the Sacramento or the Bakersfield office, I was asked to do it, and so I did. So I came over to the IG's office as the senior for the Central region. We were starting something new on the ground floor, monitoring the discipline process within CDCR. There was a lot of good I thought this agency could do for taxpayers, a lot of good I thought we could do for the system, and the model appealed to me. I didn't want to just come in and throw rocks at survivors. I wanted to actually make a difference. And so our model is real-time monitoring, where we go in when the investigation starts and we follow it all the way through to the end, nudging. And I use the analogy, I'd rather be a seeing eye dog than a attack dog. We sort of push them in the right direction, get them to do the right thing. If they step off the curb, we bark, but hopefully it's just to get them back on the curb. Whereas if you're just always yelling, screaming over here, they just tune you out eventually. So that's sort of the motto of our office in oversight. So did that until 2011, August of 2011, when I was appointed by the governor to be the Inspector General, and came up here to Sacramento, and that's my backstory.
Wow.
As we leave tonight, all of you are going to be given an important assignment. With Bob's backstory fresh in your memory, I'm asking you to go home and reflect on your own backstory. I'm asking you to see the context of the occurrences of your life and who you are and how you stand in the world today as a person and as a leader. Use Bob's life and the stories you have heard as a reflection into your own life and the important role that these stories play in shaping who you are today. My recommendation to you is to choose some of your more challenging experiences. If you can reflect and see their beauty and purpose in who you are today, then it allows us to see the sheer beauty and value of these experiences in who we are as leaders in our world. Thank you for coming tonight, and remember to return on August 6th when we're going to hear Commissioner Farrell of the California Highway Patrol, and again on November 13th as we hear Junie Lee, Chief Deputy Director for the California Department of Rehabilitation. I do guarantee that both of these events will equal the quality and reflection that you have heard these past 2 nights with Howard Schwartz and Bob Barton. Thank you. And remember, each day it is your choice to be the change you choose to see in the world. So we say, stand up, be heard.